Alright, here's the quiz corrections for pre-calc quiz number 5, sections 1.1 to 1.6, basically missing, we're skipping 1.7, we'll come back to that November 2nd, 2017. Multiple choice, circle the best solution. Number 1, multiple choice compared to the graph of the base function f of x equals square root of x. So they're telling you the parent function is this. The graph of the function g of x is x minus 5 is translated. The answer is C, 5 units to the right. Remember guys, I have this phrase, add to x, go west, which means to the left. You can draw directional symbols. Add to y, go high. So if you actually did your graph, the parent function here I have in pink, it's at the origin. You can actually pick 0, right? That's what it looks like for the square root. And then if you put in 0 here, right, the coordinate, why did I put, if you put in 5 for your x value, you'll get 5 minus 5 is 0, square root of 0 is 0, and then your order pair there is 5, 0. So you realize it's shifted to the right 5 units in purple. Also recognize I'm only giving you guys now 1 point for writing your name. Question number 2, multiple choice, given the function f of x equals x to the third minus 81x and g of x equals x plus 9, determine the simplified equation for the combined function, y equals f of x over g of x. So you just take f of x, which is x to the third minus 81x, and put that over g of x, which is x plus 9. Recognize they have a greatest common factor here of an x. And then also recognize inside here, this is also factorable, right? That's a difference of squares. So you can always have that as x squared plus 0x minus 81 if you need help factoring there. And you get these binomials. You'll recognize that these here will cancel. That is a removable discontinuity. And the reason why it's a removable discontinuity is because if you actually pick 9, or negative 9, remember we set it equal to 0, class, what's negative 9 plus 9? Do we ever want 0 in the denominator? No. So this is our simplified. You're left with x times x minus 9, and x cannot be negative 9. Remember, just take that. Anytime you have a rational function, or basically looks like a fraction to you, set the denominator not equal to 0. And then when you solve that, subtract 9, you'll get x cannot be negative 9. Question number 3, multiple choice. Determine which of the following rational functions given has the following feature, has a horizontal asymptote of y equals 3. Now, I wanted to separate the idea. This one says a vertical asymptote. Horizontal asymptote. A vertical asymptote is setting the denominator not equal to 0, which we did in the last problem. This one says horizontal asymptote is y equals 3. Now, what does that tell you? So you're supposed to look at for horizontal asymptote. So if I was taking the test tomorrow, I might want to write down that information as soon as I get the test. If the exponents, if the top is less than the bottom, then you have a horizontal asymptote always at y equals 0. If they are equal in degrees or highest powers, then you just simplify. And if they are greater than, if the top exponent is greater than the bottom one, then there is none. It's a slanted asymptote. So for example, if I look at b, the reason why it's not b is the highest power here, there is none, so you can just write x to the 0. And this one's x to the first, 0 is less than 1, so you have a horizontal asymptote y equals 0. Here the powers are equal, 1 to 1, therefore you just simplify. So if you can't cross off your x's there, you're just left with 1 over 1, which means when you simplify, 1 divided by 1 is y equals 1. Over here, you have one that is greater than, so that means you have you don't have a horizontal asymptote, you have a slanted one, or oblique. And then over here, I have our powers, 1 and 1, so they're equal, so you just simplify those. And you cancel out your x's here, and you're just left with that 3. You see it? So y equals 3 is your horizontal asymptote, and that is your their choice A. Question number 4 is all about the parent functions. match the graph by writing the appropriate basic function in the first blank. So that's the name, right? And then write the equation or function in the second blank. So the first one here is a log. I would have accepted a log or natural or logarithmic for this one right here. So you could have written f of x or y equals log x, or f of x or y equals natural log of x. Those are 2 points per blank. Question 4b, graph number 2. If you look here, I have the u, the parabola, that is a quadratic, and the quadratic is f of x equals x squared. 4c, this one should not confuse you, but should only leave you with two choices. It says sine of x. I guess you could be confused with a logistic function, but here, the difference between sine is that if I kind of made this red box here to show you guys one period, that's what we're going to talk about second semester, and it starts here at 0. So sine always starts at 0 and ends up at 0. Okay? Cosine starts at 1, makes a bucket, and ends up at 1. Okay, so that's how you're going to tell the difference between sine and cosine. Sine function is just f of x equals sine of x. And then 4D, look at graph number 5. They're misnumbered there. That is the square root function, and f of x equals the square root of x. Alright, so for question number 5, it says, use the graph provided on the right. Is the relation a function? To test if it's a function, you should be using the vertical line test. So if I take my pen, it's only going through 1 point here, 1 point there, 1 point there. So it's passing the vertical line test, so it is a function. The answer is yes. 2 points. 5b, does a relation have an inverse? Can I take the inverse of this? Well, to do that, I have to do the horizontal line test. If I put my pen down, it's going to go through multiple points where the pen is, so therefore it fails the horizontal line test, therefore it does not have an inverse. Later on, we'll talk about restricting where we actually look at. So those were 2 points apiece, and that means that whole side was out of 28. Let's go ahead and go to the back side. For your response, make sure to show all your work and box your answers. Look at people around you and their papers. If I underlined it, it means they didn't box the answers. Therefore, starting on tomorrow's test, if you're not boxing your answers, or if you're messy, you will now be losing points. You're not only losing points now for your math knowledge, just your presentation of your work. Very disappointed. You are pre-calculus students, you can do it, and you're not doing it, so now I have to penalize and threaten you. Question number 6. Given f of x is the square root of x and g of x is the square root of 5 minus x, find f plus g of 2. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do functions f plus g. So if I take my functions here, I have the square root of x, the square root of 5 minus x, and I just substitute in 2 in there. Well, if I do that, I have 5 minus 3, which is 5 minus 2, which is 3. So I have the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3. These are not like terms. You cannot add those to be square root of 5. If you do that, you will get 2 points. So that one's out of 3 points. Find the domain of f plus g of 2. So basically find the domain of what we just did above after you combine the two functions. Well, if you look at the function here, square root of x, remember, the x values all have to be positive. When it is positive, what you do is you set that greater than or equal to 0. So here is a restriction of my domain for the function of f. And if you look at g, I'm doing the same thing. I'm setting that greater than or equal to 0 and solving. So subtract 5, divide by -1, flip the inequality sign. X is less than or equal to 5. Okay, so if you think about this, I need numbers that are bigger than 0. I need numbers that are bigger than or equal to 0, but I also need the numbers that are less than or equal to 5. Keyword and there, so it has to be both conditions. So that means it's the numbers between 0 and 5. I'm including both of those brackets because it is a closed circle. Question 6c, it says find f over g, f divided by g. So I just put in my function f, which is square root of x, divided by the square root of f minus x. Notice how there is no parentheses here. In the last problem, there's a parentheses of 2, which tells you to evaluate, substitute that value in. Okay? But here, there is none. Another way of writing this would have been something like this. Right? They're telling you f divided by g and substituting x, but if they don't have that, you're still leaving it like this. Now, a lot of students try to do a lot of crazy things here. That they try to like cancel out the radicals, incorrect. So if you have this on there, I gave you at least 2. If you try to do other stuff and box that as your answer, I gave you still 2 points. This is what you need for 3 points. You're not rationalizing the denominator here, so here the radical is okay, because you're just substituting a value x. Find the domain of f divided by g. Okay, so you already have the domains up here. X has to be greater than or equal to 0. We also need numbers that are less than or equal to 5. Now pay attention. It's the same exact answer as above, but I can't pick 5. I have to change this from a bracket to a parentheses, because if I put 5 here, 5 minus 5 is 0, square root of 0 is 0. Anything divided by 0 is undefined, that's bad, right? So that's why I've changed it from a bracket to a parentheses for that problem. So 3.1, 3.1. Now, if you guys notice, I actually took this problem directly from your homework/worksheet. So if you're just doing problems just to get it done or copying your friends, you're not learning and you're missing points here. You're showing me you don't understand the math. You're just going through it, you don't understand it. Okay? So I did that on purpose to show you that what I assign you, I want you to do it for understanding, not for credit. Question number 7. Use the quadratic formula to solve, express your solutions in simplified, exact, and decimal forms. Okay? I don't know how many people, look at people around you in your papers, how many people don't know the quadratic formula. And I allow you to have a formula sheet on your quizzes and tests. That's ridiculous. And this is a pre-calculus class. I would expect an Algebra 1 student to miss it, Geometry student to miss it. Okay, Algebra 2, you should know that. It's going to be the lifesaver. But pre-calculus student, come on. A lot of you guys, every single time, every single math problem, I don't care what it is, Algebra 1, Geometry, or pre-calculus, or it could be advanced calculus, multivariable, you always write down the formula you're going to get. Always write it down, because then you can just do your substitutions. Okay? X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Then I'm going to do my substitutions. I gave you a nice easy one. It's already in standard form. A is 1, b is 4, c is 5. Make sure when you're doing your substitutions, you do them in parentheses. So if your b value is 4, put it in parentheses. B value is 4, put it in parentheses. A value is 1, put it in parentheses. C value is in parentheses. That's a 5. To simplify that, you have the opposite of 4, which is a negative 4, plus or minus. This is 4 squared, so that means 4 times 4, which is 16. This reads negative 4 times 1 times 5, which is negative 20. 16 minus 20 is a negative 4. So a lot of students like stopped here. Some students said no real solutions. We're in pre-calculus, guys. You were in Algebra 2 last year. Okay. Negative 4 is negative 1 times 4, and we already know the square root of negative 1 is I. So this all comes out of the radical. You write the I on the outside of the radical. The square root of 4 is just 2. So you're left with x equals negative 4 plus or minus 2i over 2. A lot of students had issues simplifying. So notice in the numerator, I'm just taking on greatest common factor, which is a 2. And the denominator, you can also take out a 2. Remember to double check that your greatest common factor is correct. You can always distribute, right? You see that? 2 times negative 2 is negative 4, and 2 times I is 2i. You're going to cancel those 2's, and you're left with negative 2 plus or minus I all over 1. You don't have to write the 1. Now, if you look at it, because it has an imaginary here, I can't really evaluate it. I can't get an exact solution. So there is no decimal, and this is your answer, x equals negative 2 plus or minus I. I'm going to read the directions for your response, make sure to show all your work and box your answers. Look at everyone else's paper. I can't tell you how many people didn't box their answers. From now on, I will now be penalizing you for not boxing your answers, and I will be penalizing you for messy work. It just is getting to that point where it's kind of ridiculous, and if you're not going to heed my warnings, then I just have to threaten you and take it out on your grade. I don't want it to be that case, but no one's changing. Find a formula for the inverse of x. Find the domain of inverse of f, including any restrictions inherited from f. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a formula, or basically take the inverse of f of x. So I have here square root of x minus 3. I'm going to change the f of x to a y. Switch the x and the y's place. I'm going to solve for y now. I'll take the square of both sides. So I get x squared equals y minus 3. Add 3 to both sides. And you get y equals x squared plus 3. And I'm going to change the y to now the inverse of f of x. Now when it asked the inherited restrictions, I took this question directly from your homework. And I did that on purpose, that you're not just doing it for credit, or looks like you know how to do it, but for understanding. You take everything underneath the square root, underneath the radical here, x minus 3, and it has to be a positive number, right? You can't have any negative numbers because that would turn to a complex. So you make it, you set it greater than or equal to 0. Add 3 to both sides. That means the numbers you can pick here only have to be 3 or higher, right? Because you could put a 3 in there and get 0, and square root of 0 is 0. So this is the inherited restrictions, and you could have just also write that as in interval notation, bracket 3 to infinity. For that problem, I scored you 3 points if you got x squared plus 3, but you have no restrictions on your paper. Okay. Question 1b. Clearly label and graph f of x equals the inverse and the inverse of f of x. So in blue, I'm showing you that this graph right here, this is what it means to clearly label. This is the square root of x minus 3. Now, the other graph here in kind of pink maroonish color, this would be the graph of x squared plus 3. You guys see it? And you might be asking, why did I draw this dotted line? Is to show you that there's a restriction. This is the inherited. Well, I can't pick negative numbers. And remember, the inverse, the definition of an inverse is that it's basically mirrored over this equation y equals x, right? And you can kind of see it if I folded my paper on this dotted line here. They're kind of mirror images of each other. Okay, so I took off 1 point if you had a solid line there. You could have just put x squared plus 3 into your calculator, but that restrictions part there, some of you guys lost points. 10, this should be not number 10, this should be 8A, 8B, that should be number 9. Graph the function and make sure you include the asymptote. So this problem is exactly the same as last week's. All I did was just change the numbers. Last week's, a lot of students just took it from the calculator and didn't show any work, and they have an awesome graph. Remember, I'm not looking for if you just know how to do it from your calculator. I want you to show me work. Make sure to include the asymptotes. That doesn't mean just on the graph, but you can show it to me. Remember, a vertical asymptote is found by taking the denominator and setting it not equal to 0. Add 2 to both sides. X cannot be 2 because 2 minus 2 is 0. Anything divided by 0 is undefined. Undefined is bad in this case. There, my pink line is my vertical asymptote. To find a horizontal asymptote, I need to look at the exponents. So in this problem, I have an exponent in the highest power here and here. And when they are equal, you just simplify those. So 1x over 1x. You'll see that the x's will cancel. and you're left with y equals 1. And then draw in your rational function there. You got 3 points if you just wrote the words horizontal asymptote at 1 and vertical asymptote at 2. I still want you to show your work, SW. That side was 22 points, plus the front side of 28. I'm now only giving you 1 point for your name. Now you have it out of 50 points.